on in the state right now and locally. In a few minutes, I want to get to this. We talked yesterday about St. Louis becoming an abortion sanctuary city with the signature of our mayor, Francis Slay, who's now going to ride off into the sunset and go back to practicing law. Just making sure that people can be sued if they don't agree with having an abortion clinic on their property.
Lighten up, Francis.
Talked about that yesterday and had a representative on from the Archdiocese talking about why they're so opposed to this idea for many, many reasons. Then we have this situation at Narings Hall where people are upset because a Catholic school has declined to have some sort of gay, straight alliance LGBT club on campus. I'm assuming the people that are upset about this are non-Catholics, but I could be wrong about that. So we're going to talk about that coming up a little later as well. But first, I want to welcome in former Speaker of the House, Tim Jones, well known to everyone who listens to FM News Talk 97.1. Tim, how are you?
Mark, I'm great. Thanks for having me on. And boy, it's hard to pick what to talk about these days, isn't it? There's plenty to choose from.
I'm jumping all over the place today. There's so many things are happening.
There is.
You know, yes,
I'm
watching.
Lots going on in Jeff City, as you mentioned.
I was watching that, and everybody was fired up yesterday because there were a couple of hearings on a bill that would, among other things, change the definition of what your motivation has to be if you're going to file a discrimination suit for if you get fired for wrongful determination. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that's one of the hearings that was attended by the NAACP chair who had his mic turned off, and everybody's mad about that, which kind of distracts from the issue.
Mark, that's correct. First of all, let me just, institutional memory is not very long in Jefferson City. That's the one major problem with term limits, and that can be a discussion for a different day. But I can tell you I'm very familiar with this piece of legislation, Mark, because it's been moving through the legislature in various forms for the last decade or more. I actually carried this bill, Mark, I was either a freshman or a sophomore legislator. So that would have been between 2007, 2010 timeframe. So This piece of legislation, Mark, has been debated ad nauseum in Jefferson City. It's actually passed. And gone to the governor's desk, I believe, at least twice, and it has overcome so many obstacles of the tort bar, the trial lawyers, and various other groups, and the only reason it's not become law is because it was one of those areas, one of those three areas I always talk about: tort reform, education reform, labor reform, where there's some Republicans who are, in my opinion, not true to the conservative principles and our state party platform. So this bill, Mark, has passed. It's been in and out of the legislature for about a decade. The only reason it hasn't become law previously is because Jay Nixon has vetoed it, and the Republicans were not able to overcome the veto. So here it is again in the year of a fresh new Republican governor. So the opposition is extremely hysterical that it actually might become law this year. So that's the history on that bill, Mark.
Yeah. So did I explain it properly? I mean, is that what
you did?
So if you claim that you've been fired and it's because you've been discriminated against, this raises the bar a little. It has to be your race or your age or whatever reason you think you were fired has to be the primary motivation and not some secondary motivation for you to prove your case.
Correct. And I'll correct you on one thing. It doesn't really raise the bar. It returns the bar, Mark, to what it used to be in our state.
Okay.
It also puts us in line with the federal law of the EEOC on the same subject. So it's funny, Mark, how when the left, loses elections and loses their power and loses their positions and doesn't have the facts on their side and can't argue the historical context of things, what do, Mark? They go hysterical and they start screaming. The first thing they scream is, "You're a racist." Then you're a xenophobe. Then what? Then you hate puppies, and so they go down the line, right? And so here's the things, Mark. They're up there saying things like they're using hyperbole, like we're going to be the worst state in the nation where you're not going to be able to sue for discrimination. That's a bunch of bullcocky. It's completely wrong, Mark. In fact, this puts us in line with the federal law under the EEOC, under Title VII, under this very same issue, and returns Missouri to back where it was before our activist, liberal Supreme Court moved us out of that. To the point, Mark, where the American Tort Reform Association last year ranked Missouri the number one judicial hellhole state in the country.
Jeez.
We leapfrogged over California, Illinois, and New York. And one of the main reasons, Mark, is because we have become a magnet for plaintiffs' attorneys. And guess what? People say, oh, Missourians should have access to the courts. They do. Missourians do have access to the courts. Here's what's happening, Mark. All of these outstate trial lawyers are bringing outstate plaintiffs into our venues and using our very liberal venues, especially in the city of St. Louis and in the city of Kansas City, to get before very liberal jury pools who do a lot of jury nullification and give these multi-million-dollar awards. So guess what? Missourians are actually paying the price for our completely out-of-skew tort system. And, Mark, I was a practicing lawyer for over 20 years. I'm happy to say I'm a recovering attorney now. But I handled these cases, Mark. I've been on both sides of these. And we don't need to be 50th in the nation, but we should maybe be not first. We shouldn't be the first judicial hellhole, right? We should be somewhere in the middle. We should be fair and balanced, and we're not.
And to hear the other side tell it, Stephen Roberts from St. Louis, the state rep, said this would make Missouri the most difficult place in the country to sue for discrimination.
Completely false, complete hyperbole, complete, bowing down to the lowest common denominator. It's what. So, Mark, I feel bad for the House Democrats because they are a super minority. No one pays attention to them. I mean, at least if you're a Democrat in the Senate, you've got the filibuster power, and you can get up and you can talk for a couple days straight on something if you want. But in the House, they really don't have. They don't have any. And what else they don't have is they don't have a message. They don't have a message that appeals to Missourians, right? That's why they're a super minority. They have lost the last 4 elections. They've been destroyed in the last 4 election cycles. Why? They don't have good policies. They don't have any policies on jobs. They don't have any policies on making the economy better. They don't have any policies to bring more prosperity to Missouri. So, they're governed by their far left-wing national presence, which wants to argue about bathroom laws and wants to prevent kids from having educational choice and all these things. And the sponsoring representative, who is an attorney from Springfield, Kevin Austin, he said it best when he was quoted in that same article you were reading earlier, that it becomes a motivating factor. That the reason you were fired, it's a motivating factor to prove the discriminatory context. And so, Mark, here's what plaintiffs' lawyers are doing now under this contributing factor sense. They are doing this in their closing arguments before the jury. This is how bad the law is. They're taking a piece of paper and they're tearing off a tiny corner, and they're saying, ladies and gentlemen, that's a contributing factor.
Oh my God.
I've presented you the whole case. Consider the whole case this piece of paper. But if you believe that the discriminatory conduct was a contributing factor, you have to rule for my plaintiff. And what is a contributing factor, ladies and gentlemen? Tears off a little tiny piece of corner. That is a contributing factor. Well, how can you not win that case? The scales of justice are completely slanted. And Mark, it's another reason. It's why I always say right to work is not the silver bullet. We have to have tort reform as well, because if a employer can be sued, for anything and everything to the nth degree with no caps on punitive damages, do you think that's going to be a consideration for businesses who want to expand or move here? You bet it will.
Yeah, of
you
course
bet it will be.
Well, I tell you what, Tim, I've run out of time, unfortunately. Can you wait through the break? Let me ask a couple more questions.
Oh, sure.
Do you have
absolutely.
time? All right, just checking, because I know you're a recovering lawyer, but I'm not quite sure what your schedule is today. So
I've got time for you and you alone.
I appreciate that. Let me put you on hold. We'll get back to former House Speaker Tim Jones here in just a second. I got to get to a break. 314-969-9797. The next thing I want to talk to him about, he brought up right there at the end, which is right to work. It's been signed by the governor. It's supposed to take effect in August. Now we find out that the labor unions are making one final push to try to nullify it. We'll talk about that and more right after this.